Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Northwest Passages Community Forum. I'm Laurel Demkovich, one of the Spokesman-Review's Report for America reporters based in Olympia. I cover the Washington State Legislature and issues of interest to the Eastern Washington community. Today is May 5th, the National Day of Awareness for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. Joining me today to talk about the issue of missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls is Dawn Pullin, the Washington State Patrol Tribal Liaison. Thank you, Dawn, for joining us. To start, can you tell us a little bit about your position?
Sure. My position was actually created by House Bill 1713, and that's how the creations came to be. And then I actually started my role as the tribal liaison for Eastern Washington in December 1st, 2020. So just a handful of months ago.
And what does your position kind of entail? What are some of the things that you focus on?
Well, of course, we're focusing on data, and to be honest, there's only about 5 or 7 positions like ours in the United States. And so we really don't have a roadmap or too many guardrails. So every day is different. And it could be looking through the data points. It could be receiving a phone call from some grassroots organizations or from the community. It can be an actual family member having a difficult time filing a missing persons report. So there's just a variety of things that we do. And every day is different with the ultimate goal of addressing the crisis.
And on that last point, as we've mentioned, today is National Day of Awareness for this crisis. So can you tell us a little bit about the significance of that day and the movement in general?
Sure. So as far as the movement and how it started, I really can't personally address that, but because I am part of the community, it's something that I know about and actually have experienced myself when I lost my own mother back in 1987 due to a homicide. So I have some personal experience, unfortunately. I feel the term movement somewhat diminishes the seriousness of the crisis. I'd rather prefer that we use the word crisis. And to be honest, this crisis has happened since first contact. And with social media, with the community, with folks as yourself, just bringing awareness and talking about the crisis is great. So thank you.
Of course, I appreciate you taking the time as well. And in Washington specifically, how does the crisis affect our state? I don't know if you have any specific numbers or just kind of anecdotally.
Sure. So actually, as of April 3rd of 2021, our total murdered and missing Indigenous persons number was about 90. And so we focus on MMIP because men and women both are missing at similar percentages. Men are actually probably a little bit more. So this 90 number is actually a little bit lower than when we first started our positions. Patty actually started in November of 2019. We can attribute some of that to public education, people actually being located and found, increasing communication with law enforcement, and things like that. So as of today, there's actually 44 missing women.
And do you have any sense of how that compares to other states across the country?
To be honest, no. We pull our database from what we call NCIC, and that's a federal database. And so we pull specifically to Washington State.
And
that's a good question. Yeah.
You took on this role, I believe, about 6 months ago now, if that's correct. So what are some of the obstacles that you've kind of had to overcome with this new position, like you said, that hasn't been really created before in many other places across the country?
Right. Good question. Like everybody else, the pandemic has affected our ability to communicate, our ability to get out into the community and in person and build those relationships. And so that's really important. However, it's opened up a little bit and we've had an opportunity to meet with people in person. Of course, we still meet over Zoom. When Patty came on board, she established communication and relationships with the tribal law enforcement in Washington State. So there's 29 federally recognized tribes. As far as obstacles, I don't know that we have overcome them. Like I said, these are new positions.
And so then what are, I guess, kind of along those same lines, some of the challenges you might face just every day that you might not have overcome yet, but obviously are still affecting your work?
Right. I think one of the things in the forefront is data. And so we have to, now you've got two people whose job it is to look at data. And so we want to make sure that, say, when we published our list on our website, we'll have community members, either individuals or grassroots organizations, reach out to us and say, hey, why isn't so-and-so on this list? And so that's one of the challenges, is like getting people on the list. So we have to file a missing persons report. They might not know how, and so we can help facilitate that. So I feel like one of our roles is to fill those gaps and to build those bridges and help people connect.
And before you took on this position, do you have any sense of how these cases were handled by the state? And was any of this data, like you've been mentioning, did it even exist before you got here?
The data has always been there. Like I said, we pull our data from a federal database, so it's always been there. As far as prior to our positions and what people were doing with the data, I'm not familiar with. Like every law enforcement agency has their own policies and procedures, and I can't really comment on that.
Can you talk a little bit about kind of what, I guess, the protocol is when there is a missing persons case that is filed, and kind of where you fit into that,
right.
that protocol?
So just from a general perspective, if somebody has gone missing, you do not need to wait 48 hours. You need to file that missing persons report. And where you file it kind of depends on the situation, but we would start with, where does that individual live? And so if, for example, if they lived in Spokane, you would file it with the Spokane Police Department or Sheriff's Department. And then where I would come in is if, when we pulled that data, we would make that public onto our webpage, and then we could help facilitate getting photos made public, things like that. So basically, we're, like the title of our jobs imply, liaison. We try to build those communication bridges and help fill in some of those gaps.
And you mentioned, I had asked earlier about how this crisis affects Washington State as a whole, but I'm wondering if you have any knowledge or specific data on Eastern Washington and how that area is kind of fits into this, or some of those numbers.
I don't have that off the top of my head, but if anybody wanted to go to the Washington State Patrol website, if you click on the crimes tab, and then there's a missing persons tab as well, you'll see our list there. And then off to the right, it will identify the law enforcement agency that is in charge of that investigation. And so you'll see, Yakima Nation or City of Spokane, and so you can identify the breakdown that way. So it's all public, and and Patty worked diligently on that because, you know, we had heard from the community that they would like that. So she made that happen, making that list public.
Mm-hmm. And how do you see your position and other positions like yours, maybe as part of a solution or a step to working on this crisis that has been an issue for years, but I guess how do you see yourself kind of fitting into that solution?
I think just the House bill creating the positions is, you know, one is, you know, initiated this whole, the positions, which is great. And so now, like I said, you've got two people who are, you know, it's our job to look at the data. And so we have to be able to look at the data, analyze the data, vet the data, correct it if we need to, because there's some incidences where we need to reclassify race. And so we need to get our data as accurate as possible. So we need to know where we are so we know where we can go with it. We've also categorized the missing just based on our experience in looking at the data. So there's, for example, one category is runaways. Lately, I've been hearing a lot about challenges with the foster kids. And within that group of runaways, you have your habitual or you have your first time. We are of a situation where somebody may be in a domestic violence situation. There's also and us looking at the data and kind of categorizing them is a good step, a good milestone, so that we can communicate what we're finding with the community, and so that we can start to address those categories, because there are some people that are actually lured from social media. There's trafficking involved, so there's a wide variety of reasons. And so I think by us looking at that data and being able to categorize is a great first step.
And do you think that by creating, or maybe other states kind of following this lead and creating other positions like this, or having just more people in general, whether it be at a state level or federal level, looking at this data, do you think that that would be a good step in not necessarily solving the crisis, but lessening it in any way?
Absolutely. I think the more people that can be looking at the data and showing an interest and communicating and sharing what they find is only going to lead to more exposure and more solutions. The more people that are aware of this problem, of course, you're going to get more opinions and more ideas on how to solve it. So I think that would be amazing.
And is there anything else that you want, I guess, other than maybe creating these positions, what are other steps, maybe again at a state level or federal level, that needs to happen to kind of mitigate this?
I would just probably repeat what I said. It's just making the crisis known and sharing what you know about it as far as data points, and as far as recommending what states and federal government can do. I think we're all doing the best that we can with the knowledge that we have. I think one of the things is, and I think this is common in any community or area, we all have certain specialties. And if we could find a way to come together to address this as a whole, that would be great, instead of in a siloed situation where we know some things and you don't know some things. If there was a way to do that, that would be great.
Um, and as far as just kind of this crisis as a whole, I guess, for folks maybe watching who might not know anything about it, can you maybe talk about why this is such a big issue, particularly in indigenous communities in the country?
Sure. So just based on Washington State, if tribal and the Native community make up 2% of the population in the state, we go missing at a 7% rate. And so we are disproportionately missing as compared to what we make up of the population. And so that's a problem. And then the other challenge is jurisdictional boundaries. Like who's in charge of the investigation, if it's a Native person missing on the tribal reservation, or if the victimizer is non-Native. So jurisdictionally, it's pretty complicated. And so sometimes that results in no results. And so that's a problem.
And you mentioned earlier that that number has gone down of missing Indigenous people in the state. Kind of, I think you said since you took on this role. So can you, I guess, talk a little bit more about maybe how that has happened and kind of what success you and others on your team have had?
Sure. So that number, can ebb and flow, and we pull the data weekly and we share that data with tribal law enforcement. And to be honest, that data probably ebbs and flows daily. But the thing with that is that people are being reported. Sometimes the racial identifiers are incorrect, and so they have to be corrected. There's an example where there's actually an East Indian individual who's marked as Native American, and we've all agreed that he is not, and so he needs to be changed in the system. And so we find that we need to make those sorts of corrections. And then there's also, when they do the reporting, let's say sometimes family members feel like if they mark the racial identifier as white, that they will get quicker response and they'll be found faster. And so there's some challenges with the data. So just getting it as accurate as we can get it. And then there's also, I'm sure there's underreporting. Families may not be comfortable reporting to law enforcement. A family may think that they filed a missing persons report, but it actually didn't get uploaded into the system. Of course, there's the lack of trust with law enforcement. There was actually a situation where a family kept evidence for over a decade because they didn't trust law enforcement. And so there's situations like that as well. As far as successes, because we are looking at data and we are following up, there's been several times where we actually did locate somebody, and we get calls from people out of state, actually out of the country, where we can follow up. And Patty's had great success at actually finding people. Although we don't produce that and share that information, it does happen. And
on some of those, I guess, that reuniting, without giving away anything too specific, but how,
right?
I mean, can you tell any kind of general stories about when that happens and how you feel when you do get a success like that?
Sure. So I actually helped a niece work through the process of filing a missing persons report. She wasn't getting much traction on her own. And so I assisted her with that. And then within probably 3 or 4 days, she, with the help of law enforcement, was able to locate her missing uncle. And so that's just one example. And then there's a gentleman who had left his family, decades ago, and he was located in California, and he appreciated that we had found him, but he just didn't want to have any communication with his family. So all we could do was leave contact information with him, with his family. And so when families are reunited, we all know the trauma doesn't end once the person's found. And so we just feel like it's the family's right to preserve their privacy during that difficult time. And if the family wishes to make it public, it's, their choice, but that's not something we participate in. Although, on a personal level, it'd be great to find out how everybody's doing, but that's not our role.
Right. Well, I think we have time for one last question. And you mentioned some of the stats about how Indigenous people are much more likely to go missing and compared to the population, at least in Washington. And so I guess how can the average person kind of make a difference when it comes to this or educate themselves on the issue?
Sure. Just for example, your listeners today, what they've heard, they can share what they've heard today with their family, their circle of friends. It's extremely helpful just to keep talking about it and continue the conversation. Like you said, educate yourself, kind of with the internet and the social media, there's all sorts of information that's available to everybody. For example, there's some social events today. I personally joined a MMIW virtual run with a Native women running community, and so we're going to do a run this evening. There's also an event, it's called the MMIW Day of Action at the Spokane Riverfront Park. That's also at 6. You could show support by simply wearing red today, things like that. And of course, Patty and our contact information is public. It's on the website. You have access to our cell phone. You have access to our email addresses. As a side note, when and if anybody does go to the website to view the missing persons report, we do need a photo release. So when you're looking at that and you recognize a name or somebody who recognizes that name, please have contact and reach out to us and we can help facilitate that so we can get those photos on the website as well.
And that is the State Patrol's website, is that correct?
Correct, yep.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much again, Dawn, for joining us. And thank you to everyone who's watching for joining us on the Northwest Passages Community Forum. Have a good one.
Thanks, Laurel.